Dear students, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
I welcome you to the online class being offered by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University. I'm your counselor, SM Fasiullah. I'll be dealing with the paper that is, aspects of language and their relation to literature. In the previous class, we talked about the relationship between the language and literature. And we have looked at various aspects where a normal language changes into language of literature and how language is responsible for the production of literature. And also we discussed about Indian literature and other things in our previous classes. And in the last class, we also talked about poetic function. Okay. And according to Plato and Aristotle and other medieval philosophers, what should be the function of literature. Okay. And today we'll continue with the continue our discussion on the same topic, and we'll take up fresh ideas within that and subtopics within that. Hope you are able to hear me clearly and there is no issue with the mic and other things. In this particular class, we'll be talking about analysis of literary language. Okay, at a very basic level, we realize that literary language is different from normal language because in literary language we make use of a lot of figures of speech to make it special or to make it vakrokti or crooked one, not the direct one but indirect one. Okay, in that particular discussion we'll be talking about we will actually analyze what is basically there in the language of poetry. Okay, so let's begin with this basic question: what poetry is? Okay, you can also make guesses that poetry is basically one of the oldest mode of communication. When we are talking about literature, we know that there are a variety of forms of literature and genres of literature. Okay, and within those forms and genres, the most classical one, the ancient one, right, which existed right from the beginning, okay, is the form that we call as poetry. Okay, and that is why you see, you take any literature or literature of any language, may it be English, Hindi, Sanskrit, or any language, you will find that poetry is the most prominent form. Okay, because it has existed for a long time, and human beings have experimented with poetry, trying to write poetry, trying to bring revolution in the society through poetry, trying to philosophize things using poetry, also try to express experiences and emotions of human being related to their joyful moments or their moments of stress and pain through poetry. Do you agree with this? Do you also read poetry? Anyone in the virtual classroom who has the passion to read poetry or write poetry? Have you tried writing poetry, or do you read poetry in any language, may it be Hindi, Telugu, or English, or any language that you know? Have you done that? Do you enjoy reading poetry?
Yes, sir. We enjoy reading poetry.
Yes. So what we find in poetry is a lot of variety of things, right from human experiences and emotions to philosophy to even religious things, right? In one of the class I gave you example of Gayatri mantra, right? Though it is a religious what we say verses, but it is written in the form of poetry, right? So poetry has been in use by human beings, okay, for a longer time than any other form. If you talk about novel, it is very latest phenomena. It's modern phenomenon. Okay, it has come from 17th, 18th century onwards. Prior to that, drama was very prominent, and even before that, it was poetry. Okay, so poetry existed right from the beginning. Okay, when human beings started, producing literature. Okay, that is why we are terming it as, ancient mode of, communication. And what exactly you find in terms of subject? It is human experience, it is human emotions, it is, life philosophy, it's of religion, and so many things exist within poetry as different subjects, different topics. But our interest in this particular paper or in this very topic is to understand what kind of language we find in poetry, or what kind of language is required to produce poetry, and in what way that is different from normal language. Okay, so if we analyze the language used in poetry, we find that finer words are used. It is a refined language, which means unlike the normal language that we use to communicate, language of poetry is more refined, more what we say, it is more finer, or it's more kind of catchy to ears, right? It has its own forms, right? Within poetry, we have different forms. Okay, one is epic, the other is sonnet, the other ode, and etc. etc. There are some other forms also. Okay, when we talk about different forms, you see that we have Mahabharata. Right? Mahabharata is considered as an epic, right? Mahabharata is an Indian epic. Right? So epic is basically a poem that runs into hundreds and thousands of lines. Okay. The poetry goes on in a poem, epic. Right? It is basically a story that you tell through a poem. In every poem, we don't tell stories, but in epic, what happens is, a story is, recited in the form of a poetry, and it goes on into hundreds and thousands of lines. You might have heard about not only Mahabharata, but also, say, Paradise Lost. Have you heard of Paradise Lost? It is written by John Milton.
Yes, sir.
Right? That is also, epic. So epics, if you see, epics are produced in multiple volumes. Right? There are multiple, because thousands of lines cannot be accommodated in a single page. It requires multiple volumes of books to be brought out. So generally, epics are in multiple volumes. Now we also have sonnet. Sonnet is a famous form of poetry in British literature, in British poetry especially. And we know that British poetry is inspired by Italian and French and other literatures. Okay. Sonnet might have come from Italian literature, but it is very prominent in English literature, and we know that it is a poem of 14 lines. Sonnet is a poem of 14 lines, 8 plus 4. And we have a very popular Shakespearean sonnet. Right? Now, similarly, like epic and sonnet, ode is also a form of poetry where you praise, certain things, certain people, right? You have a very famous ode to Nightingale. Who has written this? Ode to West Wind is also there. So in this particular poem, in case of ode to Nightingale, this ode is written in appreciation of, in praise of, Nightingale. Right. If you happen to know about John Keats, he is a British, English, romantic poet. He has written ode to Nightingale, and he also written ode to autumn. Ode to West Wind is written by P.B. Shelley. So these poems, basically, this form of poetry is actually celebrates or praises or appreciates the topic that is being discussed. So in this case, it is actually Nightingale. In another ode, it is about autumn. Right? One more is about ode to West Wind. So we have different forms of basically we have different forms of poetry where a subject is discussed in a different style and in different form. So when it comes to language, actually we should have talked about this earlier, this later. Anyway, so coming to the language of the poetry, we know that we use finer words in composing poetry, and the language is very refined. When I say refined, it is more calculated, balanced, right? It is written in such a way, in such a language which pleases the ears. It generates interest among us. That is the readers or the listeners. Okay. And how this language becomes refined and finer, it is through rhythm and rhyme. These are two important concepts when it comes to poetry. The language of poetry becomes language of poetry because of two important things: rhythm and rhyme. Now, what is rhythm? Rhythm could be understood as beat. You have heartbeat, right?
Yes, we have.
Yeah. How does it work? If you just put your hand on your heart and you can feel the beat. There is a repetition of certain pattern of sound, right? One is dub, dub, lub, dub, lub, dub, lub, dub, right? So that creates a beat, right? A kind of rhythm. Or more clearly, you can understand through an example of your train journey, right? If you travel in a train, right, and if the train is going at certain speed, you will feel that one particular sound is repeating. Could you recall what kind of sound you hear when you travel in a train? Not exactly that kind of sound. Rather, it is the sound of the track and the wheels. We know that there is some gap between two tracks always, because due to weather conditions, that track can contract or expand. So for that reason, there is some gap which is left between every track. And when the wheel passes through that, it creates some specific sound there. And when the train is moving at a speed, that turns into a beat. Every after some time, you get this kind of sound of the wheel and the track.
Yeah.
Small kind of jerk, right? And the more fast the train moves, the more rhythmic it looks. The frequency would be much higher, and it sounds as if some drum is being beaten. So that metal sound will not be like that of drum. It will be sharp and that kind of sound actually. And that is nothing but it's actually a rhythm. And the rhythm is because of the beat. Right? And in language, fortunately, in language, what happens is, in language, you have that particular, pattern of sound, where you have some part of the word and some part of the sentence is stressed, and the other is not stressed altogether. Now I'll give you one example to understand how this is working. Do you recall any of the rhymes that you have learned in school?
Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are.
Yes.
Star and R.
So before going to rhyme, we try to understand how rhythm is working. Right. Now, if you look at this word wonderful, right? Because we are not native speakers, so we tend to pronounce it, in the same breath force, with same, stress. Because in our Indian languages, we don't have, we hardly find this kind of, what we say, system of stress and unstress. We say words with same breath force. For example, enduku. Ela. Emaindi. Bagunnava. All these are pronouns. You see that with equal force. You don't find some part of the word being stressed, some other part is not being stressed. This system is called this kind of languages where you follow stress and unstress pattern at word level or at sentence level. That kind of language is called stress time language. And languages like, for example, our own language, Telugu or other language, they are called syllable time language. Because we don't follow stress system, so it's called syllable time. Whereas the languages where we have this stress system and we follow it is called stress time languages. Okay, so English is basically a stress time language where there is a stress system at word level and at a sentence level also. Okay, so basically the beat is created because of the stress and unstress pattern. And also stress could be at any part of the word or any part of the sentence. In case of wonderful, you have a stress at one, not der or full. Whereas in case of university, you have a stress at war, not at uni or city. Right. And these particular stress and unstress is very defined in English. You open up any dictionary, you will realize that each and every word has its own stress. But this stress system works usually at content words. Not at function words. Now, what is content word? Content words could be noun, right? Adjective, verbs, and all those things. Function words are like preposition, conjunctions, article. So these things are function words where you don't stress things. Okay, now we'll go to rhythm. So in rhythm, usually last ending word, right? Ending part of a poem is taken into consideration to find out what kind of rhyming scheme you have. So twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Star and R, right? A. Do we have? No, we don't have. Okay. So then if you continue that rhyme, twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are, up above the, what is it? What's so high? Like a diamond in the sky. So high and sky are like same again, but they are different from the first one. So we have A, then B, sky, high, like similar sounding. If you continue that way, so you will find which kind of ending sound is repeated. So based on that, a rhythm, a rhyme is created. Let's move on to after rhyme and rhythm, because two essential things in the poetry, and that distinguishes poetry from other forms of writing. We'll move on to see some more things regarding language of poetry. Now, when it comes to poetry, we also come to study about foot and meter. What is a foot? Foot is a unit of stress and unstressed syllable in a line of poetry. We come to know that stress time language like English, we have a stress system that is stress and unstressed syllable. Okay. So when these particular pattern of stress and unstress is created, right? that can be considered as fit. Now we have multiple types of food in English. One is I am, that is Troshi. One more is Anapest, Dactyl, Spondy, Peric, and Amphibrach. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. So 7 different types of feet we have in English poetry. Now, what is the pattern of each kind of food? Now, if you look at I am, you have unstressed followed by stress. Like example is alone. You are not stressing and then lone is stress. So that kind of stress unit is called I am. I am is most used food in English poetry. For example, if you are being asked randomly through an example of Shakespeare poetry, Keats poetry, or somebody else poetry, and ask you to identify the food in that, you can simply say, you can blindly go with I am, because 90% of the English poetry is written in I am. I'm not talking about the poetry being produced right now. I'm talking about the poetry produced, say, in 16th century, 17th century, 18th century. Okay. So they have extensively used I am, right, food, along with a combination of pentameter. We'll come to that about that also. Just remember that the mostly used food in English is I am. In case of Troshi is actually opposite to what I am is. In I am, you have unstressed syllabus followed by stressed one. In case of Troshi, it's opposite. Stressed syllabus followed by unstressed. Poem, right? So po is stress, is not stress. So poem. Then in Anapest, you have a different pattern where you have unstressed, then stress. So, like for example, understand. So you are not stressing un or the, but you are stressing the last syllable, that is stand. In case of Dactyl, it is opposite to Anapest. There is stress on the first syllable, but not on the remaining two. Memories. Mem-o-ries. Mem-o-ries. So you have 3 syllables, but you are stressing only the first one. Spondy is like, both stress. Truthful. In case of Peric, it's both unstressed. Officer. How do you pronounce it? Officer. No, we are not pronouncing it like that. In English, it's actually officer. That's it. Then Amphibrach, you have unstressed followed by stress and then unstressed. Another. Another. I have another meeting. So this looks interesting if you understand and if you practice it. Otherwise, it's very tricky and confusing as well. So how do you find it? Is it confusing to you or is it interesting to you? Am I connected with you? Do you think this is confusing or it's interesting to understand language at this level? How do you find it?
Interesting.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, when we know language as a very simple thing, but when we go into know its structure, its function, and all those things, it definitely becomes interesting, right? These are the things we never realize that it could be so interesting, it could be so complex, right? But when we study, we come to know more about it, and that must generate curiosity. Okay, so apart from these 7 feet, we also have the concept of meter in poetry. What is meter? Is the basic rhythmic structure of a verse or a line in a word, right? Now rhythm, we try to understand what rhythm was. Okay. So in a line of poem, there could be 1 meter, which means only 1 foot per line. If we are taking example of am, right, which means the line has only 1 stress and 1 unstressed syllable, that is 1 foot. That is why it is called mono. Mono means single meter. If a line has any 2 foot, any 2 feet, right? It could be iamb, trochee, anapest, or any combination of the 2. If there are any 2 feet in a line, then it is called diameter. If there are 3, it's called trimeter. If it is 4, it's called tetra. If it is 5, it's penta. If it is 6, it's hexa. If it is 7, it's hepta. And if it is 8, octameter. So far, people, the poets especially in English, have gone as far as writing 8 feet in a meter, in a line. Right? So if there are 8 meters in a line, then it's called octameter. But as I told you, in English poetry, typically you have iambic pentameter as the combination. Iambic pentameter. So most of the English poetry written right from Shakespearean times to say modern time, right? It is written in iambic pentameter. Iambic, unstressed followed by stress. So this is the foot, right? And which repeats at how many times? Penta means 5, right? So this foot is repeating 5 times. So in a line, iambic foot is repeating 5 times, which means unstressed followed by stress, unstressed followed by stress, unstressed followed by stress, unstressed followed by stress, unstressed followed by stress. So say this is the line, poetic line, where you have different words, right? Like twinkle, twinkle, little star. Just I'm give an example. So that line has pattern of 5 iambic foot. And that is why it is called iambic pentameter. So most of the English poetry is written in iambic pentameter. And if you get a question on this, you can blindly answer it in any competitive exam. I hope you understood these two, this concept of foot and meter.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to, we are done with poetry. In poetry, we understood the concept of syllable and stress and unstressed one, both stress syllable and unstressed syllable. And then we also understood the concept of rhythm, rhyme, and foot and meter. Now we'll look at some other devices, like I told you beginning that normal language changes to language of literature because of use of figures of speech or literary devices. So poetry also makes use of a lot of poetic devices or literary devices, you call it, or figures of speech. So two important one which are mentioned in your syllabus also, popular thing is alliteration and onomatopoeia. What is alliteration? It is the recurrence or repetition of identical consonant sounds in a line or succession of words. And it means in a line of poetry, right, the initial words of a poem, of a line in a poem has repeating sound. That is especially which sound? Consonant sound. Now, in example, you have tiger, tiger burning bright. It is actually a poem by William Blake, where you have this t, t sound, b, b sound. T and b are consonant sounds. So these sounds are repeating, right? Recurring or repeating, whatever you call it, same thing. And which sound is that? Consonant sounds. So where it is repeating? In a line, right? It's a poetic line. In a poetic line, it is repeating. So that kind of repetition of consonant sound is called alliteration. Now, a doubt may come. Instead of consonant sound repeating in the beginning of a word in a poetic line, there you have vowel sound. So what do you call it? In a poetic line, if consonant sound is repeating at the beginning of a word, right, and creating kind of pattern, so that kind of repetition we are calling it as alliteration. Instead of consonant sound, if you have vowel sound, so what do you call it? Assonance. What do we call it? Assonance. If there is a repetition of vowel sound in a poetic line, then it is called assonance. Otherwise, if it is a consonant sound that is repeating, then it is called alliteration. I hope you understood it. Have you?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So similarly, we have another some poetic device or literary device that is used in poetry. That is onomatopoeia. Right? Is actually a forming of words by imitating the sound the word is referring to, which means technically, if the dog is barking, what does dog do? It barks, right? Instead of barking, you use bow wow, right? Instead of bark as a verb, you are using the same words that is produced by the animal and using that in the line of a poetry. Such kind of technique of using the actual sound in the line of a poetry is called onomatopoeia. Right? Now, what does flies do? They buzz. Right? If a fly comes near you, what kind of sound you hear? Buzz. Whether it's mosquito, whether it's fly or any fly, you usually get zzz, right? That's a buzz. So I heard a fly buzz when I died. It's actually a line from Emily Dickinson's poem. So here the buzz is basically a onomatopoeia because that is exactly the sound produced by bees. So here in onomatopoeia, we are referring to a technique where the poet is using actual sound in a line of poem. Okay? I hope that is also clear to you. We'll move to other devices. Here, two more one. We'll talk about two more and then move on to prose. Then, yeah. So imagery refers to use of language by writers to create images in the mind of reader. Now, there is a line, there is a poem written by William Carlos Williams. He is a very famous poet from America. So what his poem reads like, now you just read this. I have eaten the plums that were in the ice box and which you are probably saving for breakfast. So this is basically a small piece from his poem. So when you read this poem, an image is creating in your mind that somebody is actually eating, right? And that too, they are not eating something, they are eating plums, right? Which were placed in the ice box, right? And perhaps that was saved for the breakfast. So through words, it is possible to create an image in the mind of the reader or the listener. So that technique of creating image through words employed by poets, that technique is called imagery. The technique is called imagery. So through use of language, writer is creating images in the mind of the reader. Now we'll move on to, I hope you understood what imagery is. So symbolism is the use of symbols to represent ideas or qualities. Similarly, one more poetic device or figure of speech that we use is symbolism. Symbolism is the use of symbols to represent ideas or qualities. For example, the color white, right, could mean a color simply, but that is denotative meaning. Connotatively, it stands for purity. It stands for so many things, right? Because language of literature and especially language of poetry is not direct. It is vakrokti. It's indirect. So which means the target is indirect meaning, interpretative meaning, or connotative meaning. So that kind of method or technique of using some symbol to represent some ideas. Okay, so here white as a symbol is used to represent the idea of purity. Right. Also, in a similar way, we use a dove, right, as a symbol of peace. Right, dove as a symbol of peace. Now we'll talk about the language that we see in fiction. So far we talked about poetry. Now we'll talk about fiction. In fiction, the few things that we see as techniques. One is repetition. There is dialogue. Repetition refers to repeating of words or expression by writers to create an effect or for emphasis. For example, I came, I saw, I concurred. Right. So in this particular piece of prose or fiction, what is repeating here? I, I. Okay. So this repetition of I is actually, creating some kind of, beautiful effect on the mind of the reader, right? And it also points to maybe, emphasis, right? Similarly, you have this, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And here actually it should be it. Okay. So here it was is, repeated. And times of times is repeated. So this repetition is actually a technique used in the language of, fiction. And also the other technique used is, dialogue. Because there are multiple characters in a story, in a piece of fiction. So each character uses, different, style of, language or way of speaking. Okay. For example, Mrs. Malaprop in Shadian's play The Rivals uses a certain language which becomes a malapropism itself. So that kind of usage of language has become one variety altogether. For example, if you have heard about MC Stan, right? He uses a kind of language which is characteristic, of typical local, Mumbai area people. So each character, the writer, makes the characters speak a slightly unique language, right? So dialogue is basically, is a technique, used by many of writers to distinguish between, the character, their personality through the language. Now, if you go and talk about, prose, in prose, that especially, letters and speeches. Okay, so letters are used in literary, works. For example, in Persuasion novel by Jane Austen, there is a letter written by, Wentworth to Anne, right? Similarly, there are a lot of, letters, if I remember it correctly, there are a lot of, letters, I'm not able to recall it right now. So letter as a technique is used in, actually, prose. In speeches, when it comes to speeches also, writers have, used speeches across, literature. For example, there is a famous speech written by, Shakespeare in his play, Julius Caesar, right? So that, is actually a speech delivered by Antony, friend of Julius Caesar, when he accused, Brutus of, the murder. Okay, but in that particular speech, we see that, there is one particular line that repeats again and again, right? And that line is, Brutus is an honorable man. So Antony, while delivering the speech, right, he charges Brutus for the murder, but he put it in so positive way that, he conveys the message, yet he doesn't hurt. Okay, so speeches, Shakespeare has used, a lot of speeches in his, works in drama. Okay, so this is what we have had to discuss in today's class, right? So we try to understand, or we try to analyze how the language of, literature, especially poetry, fiction, and prose, is different from normal language and what makes it different. Okay, so we have seen some, tradition of writing, poetry, where we follow the concept of rhyme, rhythm, foot, and meter. And when it comes to fiction, the usage of, symbols, alliteration, assonance, onomatopoeia, and all those things. And these are the very things, or these are the very techniques, right, which marks the language of literature different from normal language. I hope you understood all these things and hope you would be able to write about these things if asked in the examination. So before I close the class for today, I request if you have any question to ask or if you want any further clarification on any of the point we discussed, you are most welcome. Do you have anything to discuss or shall we call it a day? So I think, nobody has any questions and things went so good so far. So thank you so much for being with me in this virtual class. And hopefully tomorrow or the next class would be the last class scheduled by the university. And I request you to go through your syllabus and see if there is any topic that you have not understood, or if there is any concept that you have now not understood. You can directly ask me tomorrow. If not, we will discuss the question paper pattern and in what best way you can attempt your examination. So tomorrow's last class is reserved for examination related queries and exam paper related pattern and all those things. And if time permits, we'll take up your questions also. So thank you so much. Take care of yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.